Alex Vance believed his 10-year marriage was a quiet partnership, a structure built on shared history and comfortable silences. It was a house he had carefully maintained, ensuring the foundations were solid, the bills were paid, and the roof would never leak. Isabella, his wife, however, saw it as a 10-year holding pattern. She had been waiting for a life that glittered, a life she read about in glossy magazines and saw on curated social media feeds. Alex, with his steady, predictable job as a senior financial analyst and his quiet, unassuming demeanor, was the sturdy foundation she now found suffocating. She wanted a skyscraper, and Alex, in her eyes, was a bungalow. She delivered the news on a Tuesday evening, the air thick with the scent of the lemon chicken Alex had just pulled from the oven. He was setting the table, placing the forks just so, the way she liked them. Isabella stood in the doorway of the dining room, not dressed for dinner but for departure. She wore a sharp, black dress he'd never seen before, her arms crossed over her chest as if warding off the very domesticity of the scene. "I can't do this anymore, Alex," she said. Her voice wasn't angry or sad. It was chillingly resolute, the tone of a CEO announcing a necessary but unpleasant restructuring. Alex placed the last fork down, his hand hovering over the polished wood of the table. "Do what? The chicken? I can order something else if you're not in the mood." A sigh escaped her lips, laced with a decade of accumulated impatience. This quiet little life. I'm leaving." The words hung in the air, seeming to warp the warm, familiar space into something cold and alien. "Leaving?" he repeated, the single word feeling clumsy and heavy in his mouth. Where are you going?" "I found someone," she said, and there it was, the first tremor of the earthquake that would level his world. "Someone who gets it, who wants the same things I do." She looked around the tastefully decorated but modest home. The home Alex had purchased with the first significant bonus from his job. Her gaze was a dismissal. "More than this." He finally turned to face her fully, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the almost triumphant glint in her eyes. There was no room for negotiation in her expression. This was a verdict, not a proposal. "Who?" "His name is Julian Croft," she said, and the way she spoke his name was an indictment of his own. It was spoken with a reverence, a sense of arrival. "He's a real estate developer. He's dynamic, Alex. He's a real thing. A man who isn't afraid to live, to be seen." The implication was a slap. Alex was not a real thing. His life was not living. His quiet successes were invisible and therefore worthless. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a young man, before he had built the fortress of his true life, a fortress whose existence he had kept a steadfast secret. "I see," Alex said, his voice preternaturally calm. Inside, a storm was gathering, but his face remained a placid lake. It was a discipline he had mastered over years of high-stakes negotiations that no one in his personal life knew he conducted. Isabella took his calmness for weakness, for the pathetic resignation of a man who knew he'd been outmatched. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours. I'll be staying with Julian. I'll send for my things later." She turned, her heels clicking in assertive rhythm on the hardwood floor. At the door, she paused. "I hope you understand, Alex. I just need more. I deserve more." Then she was gone. The front door closed with a soft, final click. The lemon chicken sat on the counter, its warmth slowly fading. Alex stood motionless in the dining room, the forks gleaming under the chandelier. He looked at the life she had just condemned as insufficient, as a pale imitation of what she deserved. He thought of the numbers in accounts she couldn't fathom, the ownership percentages in companies she'd never heard of, the true nature of the work he did in his small, quiet home office. He thought of the figure, a cool, staggering $200 million, that constituted his actual net worth, a number he had kept hidden not out of shame, but out of a deeply held belief that it shouldn't be the foundation of his life or his marriage. He had wanted to be loved for the man he was, not the balance in his accounts. Isabella thought she was leaving a bungalow for a skyscraper. She had no idea she was abandoning a hidden palace, a kingdom she had never even bothered to look for the key to. And Julian Croft, this real thing, was about to learn a very hard lesson about underestimating the quiet man in the quiet house. The restructuring was indeed coming. But it wasn't Alex's life that was about to be downsized. Before we witness the fallout from this catastrophic miscalculation and the quiet storm that Alex is about to unleash, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Tell us your city or country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to the moment the first cracks began to show, long before the walls came tumbling down. The cracks had been forming for years, hairline fractures in the facade of their marriage that Alex, in his patient, methodical way, had tried to patch. He had mistaken Isabella's growing dissatisfaction for temporary unhappiness, her desire for glamour as a passing phase. The most significant tremor had occurred 3 months prior, at her parents' anniversary dinner. It was an event that, in retrospect, served as the prologue to her departure. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, were people who measured worth in visible assets and public acclaim. They were polite to Alex, but with the strained courtesy one affords a piece of furniture that is functional but aesthetically disappointing. They had never understood what their vibrant, ambitious Isabella was doing with a man who described his job as managing portfolios for a private capital firm to them. It sounded like glorified bookkeeping. That night, Julian Croft had been there. He was a new friend of the family, introduced with a flourish by Richard as the man changing the city's skyline. Julian was everything Alex was not. He was loud, his laughter booming across the restaurant's private dining room. He wore a watch that cost more than Alex's car, and he made sure everyone noticed it. His suit was aggressively fashionable, and his stories were all grand tales of deals conquered and rivals vanquished. Throughout the dinner, Alex became the designated counterpoint to Julian's brilliance. Richard would clap Julian on the back after a story about a hostile takeover of a downtown property, and then turn to Alex with a placid smile. "And how are things in your world, Alex?" All the numbers adding up. The question was always followed by a ripple of polite, condescending laughter. Alex would simply nod. "Everything is stable, Richard. We're seeing good returns." "Good returns. That's the ticket," Richard would boom, already turning back to Julian. "Now, Julian, you were telling me about the Azure Tower project." Isabella watched these exchanges, and Alex could see the slow-burning shame in her eyes. She wasn't ashamed of her father's rudeness. She was ashamed of Alex's quiet, dignified response. She wanted him to fight back, to puff up his chest, to boast of his own accomplishments. But Alex's accomplishments were classified. The very nature of his firm, Titan Capital, was that it operated in the shadows, its immense wealth and influence wielded silently. Its public face was his partner, Marcus Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with financial power. Alex was the architect, the strategist, the silent king behind the curtain. To boast would be to break the cardinal rule of his success. At one point, Julian turned his full, charismatic attention to Alex. "Isabella tells me you're a numbers guy, Alex. An analyst. Solid work. Safe. But you have to live a little, my friend. You know what they say, scared money don't make money," he grinned, a flash of perfectly white teeth. "You ever think about getting into the real game? Property development. Something tangible. Something you can point to and say, 'I built that.'" Alex felt Isabella's foot press against his under the table. A silent, desperate plea for him to say something impressive. He looked at Julian, a man whose entire identity seemed to be a performance of success. In his briefcase, tucked beside him, was a simple leather-bound folio. Inside that folio were the incorporation documents for Titan Capital and the schematics for 3 data centers his company had built. Vast, tangible structures that powered a significant portion of the region's digital infrastructure. He could have pointed to almost any major tech company and said, "I funded that." Instead, he gave a small, calm smile. "I prefer a different kind of architecture, Julian. Less concrete, more code. It's a quieter business." Julian had laughed, a dismissive, hearty sound. "Quieter, right? Well, someone's got to keep the lights on, I suppose." He then turned to Isabella and placed a hand on her arm, a gesture of casual intimacy that did not go unnoticed. "Don't you worry, Isabella. I'll make sure you get to see some real fireworks." Alex saw the look that passed between them, a spark of shared ambition, a mutual understanding that Alex was not part of their world. He felt a profound sense of isolation. He had built a silent empire to provide a life of absolute security for his family, for his wife. He had assumed that the security and the love he gave freely would be enough. He had failed to understand that for Isabella, if success wasn't loud, it wasn't real. That evening, as they drove home in a tense silence, he realized the foundation of their house was not built on the bedrock he thought it was. It was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. The man she called the real thing had just shown her a picture of a different castle, and she was already packing her bags to move into it. The days following Isabella's departure were a study in sterile efficiency. She did not call. She did not text. The only communication came from a high-priced law firm with a letterhead that seemed designed to intimidate. A junior associate, a young woman with a voice sharpened by ambition, called to inform Alex that they would be sending a team to collect Mrs. Crofts. She corrected herself quickly, "Your wife's personal belongings." They did so with a cold, impersonal crew who moved through the house with checklists, packing away 10 years of shared life into cardboard boxes. They took the art from the walls, the expensive vase from the mantelpiece, the books from her side of the bed. Alex watched from his home office, the door slightly ajar. He felt like a ghost in his own home, a silent observer of its deconstruction. Each box they carried out was another blow. He saw them take the silver picture frame from the living room, the one with a photo of him and Isabella in Italy, smiling years ago when their quiet life had seemed like a shared dream. He had paid for that trip with the proceeds of his first major algorithm sale, a secret victory he had celebrated by taking his wife to Florence. She had loved the art, the history, the grandeur. He thought he was giving her a piece of that. He now realized she had only seen it as a temporary escape from a life she already found lacking. When they were gone, the house was hollow. The silence was no longer comfortable. It was cavernous. It echoed with her parting words, "I deserve more." The next communication was the formal divorce petition. It was delivered by a courier who demanded a signature. Alex sat at his large oak desk in his office, the room that had always been his sanctuary, and read the document. It was a masterpiece of legal aggression. Isabella, guided by Julian and her lawyers, was demanding the house, half of his projected future earnings from his job as a senior analyst, and a significant monthly alimony payment to maintain the lifestyle to which she had become accustomed. The document painted a picture of him as a mid-level corporate functionary with a stable but limited income. Their valuation of his assets was meticulously researched, based on the public records of his salary, his 401k, and the estimated value of their home. It was a perfect assessment of the man he pretended to be. It was off by a factor of about 1,000. Alex leaned back in his chair, a slow, humorless smile touching his lips for the first time in days. This was the game. They had defined the battlefield, drawn the lines, and assumed they knew the strength of their opponent. It was the same mistake countless corporate raiders and rival firms had made when facing Titan capital. They saw the public face, the expected moves, and they never saw the real strategy until it was too late. He picked up his phone. He didn't call his family or friends. He didn't need sympathy. He needed counsel. His first call was to a man named Elias Vance. No relation. A coincidence that had amused them both for years. The most feared and respected corporate litigator in the country. Elias was the legal sword of Titan Capital, a man who had dismantled billion-dollar corporations with nothing more than a well-phrased motion. "Elias," Alex said when the call was answered. "It's Alex. Alex, I was just reviewing the quarterly projections from Marcus. Impressive. You've outdone yourself again. What can I do for you?" "Another hostile acquisition you need me to quietly arrange." Elias's voice was warm but carried the precision of a scalpel. "Something a bit more personal," Alex said, looking at the divorce petition on his desk. "I need to retain your services for a domestic matter." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Elias had handled Alex's corporate and financial life for 15 years, but never his personal one. Isabella? Elias asked, his tone shifting from professional to concerned. She's left. She has retained counsel and has made certain demands. Let me guess, Elias said, a weary sigh in his voice. They think you're the man you pretend to be. To the letter, Alex confirmed. And they've gotten aggressive, assuming you'll roll over to avoid a messy public fight. Elias continued, his mind already mapping out the strategic possibilities. They are demanding the house and alimony based on an income of $200,000 a year. Elias was silent for a moment longer. Then he let out a low chuckle. It was not a sound of mirth, but of a predator recognizing an amateur's mistake. Oh my, they have no idea, do they? They've brought a knife to a thermonuclear engagement. Alex, this is not a legal problem. This is a teachable moment. What is your desired outcome? Alex thought for a long moment. He could crush them. He could bankrupt Julian, humiliate Isabella, and leave them with nothing. The power to do so was sitting in his hands. But the JSON profile of his own character, the man he had striven to be, demanded more. Not cruelty but justice. Not revenge but a rebalancing of the scales. The house is a non-negotiable asset of the corporation, held in a trust. She can't have it. Alimony is out of the question. I want her to have her personal effects and what she is legally entitled to from our shared assets, the ones she knows about. But more than that, Elias, I want them to understand. Understand what, Alex? The truth, Alex said softly. I want them to sit in a room and understand the reality of what they threw away, and what they tried to take. A meeting, then, Elias said, his voice now alight with strategic fire. A final settlement conference. We will accept their proposal for a meeting. Let them come confident and proud. Let them make their case. And then, Alex, you will present yours. I'll handle the arrangements. Just tell me when and where. Alex looked out his office window at the quiet, suburban street. It was the perfect camouflage. Here, he said. Let them come here. To the house they believe is their grand prize. Poetic, Elias approved. I'll draft our response. They'll read it as a sign of capitulation. They will be very, very confident when they walk through that door. And you, my friend, will be ready. After the call, Alex walked to his desk and picked up the leather folio. He opened it, the scent of old paper and ink filling the air. He didn't look at the financial documents. He looked at a single, folded piece of paper tucked in a side pocket. It was a note Isabella had written him on their 5th anniversary. To my quiet, steady rock, it read. Thank you for being my anchor. He folded the note and put it back. She had seen his nature as a strength once. Now she saw it as a weakness. The tragedy was not that she was leaving him. The tragedy was that she had forgotten who he was. He would have to remind her. In the weeks leading up to the proposed settlement meeting, Isabella's life was a whirlwind of triumphant validation. Julian was intoxicating. He moved through the city like he owned it, and with him, Isabella felt like a queen. They were the couple everyone watched, their arrival at restaurants and charity galas causing a ripple of whispers. Julian would have a hand possessively on the small of her back, his voice booming as he greeted financiers and city council members by their first names. He would introduce Isabella not as a man's wife, but as his partner. This is Isabella, he would say, the brilliant woman who finally convinced me to settle down. She was living the life she had craved. The quiet dinners at home were replaced with catered parties on Julian's penthouse terrace. The skyline of the city a glittering tapestry at their feet. The comfortable silences were filled with the energetic buzz of powerful people discussing powerful things. She had traded Alex's unassuming sedan for Julian's gleaming Aston Martin. The roar of its engine a visceral confirmation of her upgrade. Her parents were ecstatic. They doted on Julian, hanging on his every word. Now this is a man, Isabella, her father, Richard, had said during a lavish brunch. A man of action, a builder, not some number cruncher hiding in a back office. Eleanor, her mother, was already planning the wedding. It will be the event of the season, she cooed. looking at Julian's diamond-encrusted watch with open admiration. "We have to find a venue worthy of you too." In this glittering new world, Alex was a fading, gray memory. When she thought of him, it was with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was the past, the starter husband, the man who had provided a stable launchpad from which she could soar. Her lawyers had informed her that Alex's attorney, some man named Elias Vance, had agreed to a final meeting at the house. They had interpreted his willingness to meet on his own turf as a sign of weakness, an emotional man clinging to the last vestiges of his broken marriage. "He's probably going to plead with you to come back," Julian said one evening, swirling a glass of expensive scotch as they looked out over the city. "Pathetic. We'll be firm, darling. Our lawyers will handle it. You just have to sit there and look beautiful and resolute. We'll take the house, get you a nice settlement to start your new life, and then this chapter will be closed." Isabella felt a flicker of something. Guilt, perhaps, but she quickly extinguished it. This was her due. She had given Alex 10 years of her life, her youth, her ambition. She had tried to mold him into the man she needed him to be, but he had resisted, content in his small, safe world. Julian was right. This was a business transaction now, the closing of a failed merger. His lawyer's response was very simple. Her own lawyer, a slick man named Peterson, had told her over the phone. "They just said they are prepared to discuss a final and equitable distribution of assets that surrender language, Isabella. They know we have you dead to rights on the lifestyle maintenance claim. He's a high earner for his field, and you are entitled to continue living that way." The confidence of her entire circle was absolute. They were a pack of wolves who had cornered a sheep, and they were already tasting victory. The day of the meeting arrived, a crisp, bright autumn afternoon. Isabella chose her outfit carefully. A severe but elegant pantsuit in a deep navy blue. It was a power suit, a declaration of her new status. Julian drove them to the house. As they pulled into the familiar driveway, Isabella felt a strange pang. The house looked smaller, more ordinary than she remembered. The quiet suburban street felt muted compared to the vibrant energy of downtown. "Ready to get this over with?" Julian asked, squeezing her hand. His confidence was a warm blanket. "Ready," she said, forcing a smile. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, arrived moments later, insisting on being there for moral support in reality. They wanted front-row seats to the final triumph. Their presence was part of the psychological warfare, a demonstration of the united front Alex was up against. They walked up the path together, a formidable party of 4. Julian, the conquering hero, Isabella, the liberated queen, and her parents, the proud courtiers. They were about to walk into a negotiation to divide the assets of a man they believed earned $200,000 a year. They believed they held all the cards. They believed they were in control. Alex watched them approach from his office window. He was dressed simply, in a dark gray sweater and slacks. There was no suit of armor, no power tie. His only accessory was the worn leather folio that sat on the large conference table he had moved into the center of the living room. The room had been stripped of all personal effects, all remnants of his life with Isabella. It was no longer a home. It was a boardroom. Elias Vance stood beside him, a tall, silver-haired man with eyes that missed nothing. "The delegation has arrived," Elias said calmly. "Shall we let them in?" Alex took a deep breath. The storm he had been holding back was about to break. "Yes," he said, "let them in. It's time for the meeting to begin." He felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he always had in the moments before a major market play, the quiet certainty of a man who knows he has already won. The only thing left was to watch it unfold. The group entered the house with an air of proprietary confidence. Julian's eyes swept over the living room, which had been reconfigured for the meeting. Instead of the cozy sofas and armchairs, there was a long, polished mahogany table with 6 chairs. It looked stark and official. Alex and a man they didn't recognize stood at the far end of the table, waiting. "Alex," Isabella said, her tone cool and businesslike, This is my legal counsel, Mr. Peterson. She gestured to the slick, smiling man beside her. And you know my parents. Julian stepped forward, extending a hand not to Alex, but to the stranger beside him. Julian Croft. And you must be Mr. Vance, Alex's lawyer. Glad we can finally put this to bed. Elias Vance looked at Julian's extended hand but did not take it. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I am Elias Vance, he said, his voice as smooth and cold as river stone. The snub was so subtle, so masterfully executed, that Julian was left with his hand awkwardly hanging in the air for a moment before he retracted it, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Right? Well, Peterson, Isabella's lawyer, said, clearing his throat to break the sudden tension. Shall we sit? My clients are eager to find an amicable resolution. They all took their seats. Isabella, Julian, and her parents sat on one side of the table, a united front. Their lawyer sat at the head. Alex took a seat opposite Isabella, and Elias sat beside him, placing a slim, elegant briefcase on the table. Peterson began, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity. Alex, Isabella has the utmost respect for the 10 years you spent together. This is a difficult time for everyone. However, she has needs and expectations based on the life you built together. We have prepared a proposal that we believe is more than fair. It will allow both of you to move on with your lives. He slid a document across the table. We are proposing that Isabella retain ownership of this property. Free and clear. It's her home. Furthermore, based on your income, which we've conservatively estimated at $200,000 annually, we are proposing an alimony settlement of $80,000 per year for a period of 10 years. This will allow her to maintain a semblance of the lifestyle she is accustomed to while she gets back on her feet. Richard chimed in from the sidelines, unable to help himself. It's the least you can do, Alex. Isabella gave you the best years of her life. Alex listened without expression. He didn't look at the document. His eyes were on Isabella. He saw the conviction in her face, the belief that what she was asking for was her right. He saw the smug satisfaction on Julian's face, the look of a man who was enjoying his rival's public defeat. When Peterson finished, a confident silence filled the room. They all looked at Alex, expecting a protest, a plea, a negotiation. They were waiting for the sheep to bleat. Alex let the silence stretch, each second amplifying their certainty. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. He turned his gaze from Isabella to her lawyer. Mr. Peterson, Alex began, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the aggressive energy coming from the other side of the table. I have a few questions before we discuss your proposal, if you don't mind. Of course, Peterson said, leaning back, magnanimous in his perceived victory. Your proposal is based on an income of $200,000 a year. How did you arrive at that figure? Alex asked. We subpoenaed your employment records from your firm, Sterling Financial. Your W-2s are quite clear, Peterson replied smoothly. Sterling Financial. Alex repeated the name, letting it hang in the air. Yes, my declared employer, he paused. And the house. You propose Isabella retain ownership. On what grounds? It was the marital home. She has a deep emotional attachment to it, Peterson said. Alex's gaze flickered to Isabella. An emotional attachment? That's interesting. My understanding was that this house, and the quiet little life within it, were the primary reasons for your departure. Isabella flinched as if struck. The color drained from her face. It was the first direct hit, and it had come not with a shout, but with a quiet, factual statement. Julian bristled, placing a protective hand on her arm. Now, see here. There's no need for personal attacks. This is a legal proceeding. Elias Vance spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the air like a razor. Mr. Croft, you are not a party to this marriage, nor are you an officer of the court. You are a guest in this house. I would advise you to remain 1 inch. His tone was not loud, but it carried an authority that made Julian physically recoil. Alex continued, his focus unwavering. Let's talk about lifestyle. The lifestyle you wish to maintain. He turned his attention to Richard and Eleanor. Richard, on April 12th at the club, you referred to my car as sensible but uninspired. Eleanor, at your anniversary dinner, you lamented that Isabella's wardrobe was limited by a sensible budget. And Julian, he said, now locking eyes with the developer, you have, on multiple occasions, referred to my career as safe and small time. He was reciting their insults back to them, not with anger, but with the cold precision of an auditor reading a list of discrepancies. This was the list of grievances, and each item was a small, sharp cut. I only ask, Alex continued, his voice dropping slightly, drawing them in, because I want to understand the foundation of your demands. It seems you are asking to be compensated for a lifestyle you openly held in contempt. The room was silent. Peterson's smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of wary confusion. Richard and Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Isabella stared at her hands, refusing to meet Alex's gaze. The problem with your proposal, Mr. Peterson, Alex said, is that it is based on a fundamental misunderstanding, a series of flawed assumptions. He reached for the worn leather folio and placed it in the center of the table. He opened it slowly, deliberately. The confidence on the other side of the table had now fully evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of dread. They were beginning to realize that this was not the room they had thought they were walking into. You've all been very clear about what you think of my life, my career, and my worth, Alex said, his eyes scanning each of their faces. Now, allow me to clarify a few things. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from a confident negotiation to a tense courtroom drama. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Peterson, Isabella's lawyer, was the first to find his voice, though it was now strained. Mr. Vance, if you have a counterproposal, now would be the time to present it. These recriminations are not productive. On the contrary, Elias Vance interjected smoothly, without looking up from the notepad he was doodling on. We believe context is everything. Please, Alex, continue. Alex slid a single document from the folio. It was a simple deed of trust. He pushed it across the table toward Peterson. Let's begin with the house. Your proposal that Isabella retain ownership is, I'm afraid, impossible. You see, I don't own this house. A flicker of hope ignited in Isabella's eyes. If he didn't own it, perhaps it was in her name. This property, Alex continued, dashing her hope before it could fully form, is owned by a private trust, the Vance Family Strategic Holdings Trust, to be precise. I am the trustee but not the owner. It is a corporate asset, provided for my use. As such, it was never a marital asset to be divided. Mrs. Croft Isabella was merely a guest here. Her residency was tied to our marriage. That arrangement is now terminated. The trust requires the property to be vacated by non-beneficiaries within 30 days. Peterson snatched the document, his eyes scanning it furiously. He saw the official seals, the dense legal language. He looked up, his face pale. This is highly irregular. It is highly prudent, Elias corrected him gently. Alex then turned his attention to the matter of his income. Your second assumption is about my employment. You are correct that I draw a salary from a company called Sterling Financial. It's a small accounting firm. He paused, letting the admission sink in. Richard scoffed. So it's even less than we thought. An accountant. Alex ignored him. Sterling Financial is a shell corporation. Its sole purpose is to manage my personal payroll and create a plausible employment history for tax and public record purposes. It's a firewall. My actual employer is a different entity entirely. He slid another document from the folio. It was a single page with a simple, elegant letterhead, Titan Capital. Julian Croft, who had been silently fuming, stiffened. His head snapped up. Titan Capital was not just a company. It was a legend in the financial world, a ghost, a private equity and venture capital behemoth so powerful and so secretive that its name was only ever spoken in whispers in the highest echelons of finance. They were known for buying entire corporations with cash, for funding the technological revolutions of the past decade, and for having no public face save for one man. Titan Capital, Julian breathed the name. That's Marcus Thorne's firm. That is the common perception, Alex said calmly. Marcus is the public face, the voice of the company. He enjoys the spotlight. At that exact moment, as if summoned by the incantation of his name, the front door of the house opened. A man walked in, dressed in a suit that was the epitome of understated power. He was handsome, famous, and radiated an aura of immense wealth and influence. It was Marcus Thorne. Every person at the table, with the exception of Alex and Elias, recognized him instantly. He was a regular on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. Marcus's eyes scanned the room, a bemused expression on his face. "Alex," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "Elias, sorry to interrupt. You said you needed me to stop by? The board meeting for the telecom acquisition is at 3". He walked over to the table and stood behind Alex, placing a hand on his shoulder. He nodded politely to the stunned faces on the other side. "You must be Isabella," he said, his smile friendly but his eyes analytical. "Alex has told me so much about you over the years." Isabella could only stare, her mouth slightly agape. Julian looked as if he had seen a ghost. Richard and Eleanor were frozen, their minds struggling to process the scene. Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, was standing here, in this modest house, speaking to Alex as if he were an equal. No, not an equal. He was speaking to him with a clear, unmistakable deference. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Alex said. "We're just in the middle of a financial clarification. You arrived at the perfect moment." He looked directly at Julian. "You are correct, Julian. Marcus is the face of Titan Capital. But he is not the owner. He's a brilliant CEO and a valued partner, but he runs the company. He doesn't own it." He then delivered the final, devastating blow, the quiet bomb that reconfigured their entire reality. "I am the silent founder, the chief architect, and the majority shareholder of Titan Capital." He let the statement land. Simple, devastating, final. He watched the comprehension dawn on their faces, a slow, horrifying wave of understanding. He saw the moment Isabella's mind connected the dots, the quiet nights he spent in his office, the boring work he did, the trips he took for conferences. It wasn't the life of a mid-level analyst. It was the life of a man running a global financial empire from the privacy of his suburban home. He saw the blood drain from Julian's face. Julian, the self-proclaimed real thing, the builder of towers. He was a minnow who had been puffing his chest out at a blue whale. His entire net worth was likely a rounding error on Titan Capital's quarterly earnings report. Alex turned his gaze back to Isabella. Her face was a canvas of shock, regret, and a dawning, soul-crushing humiliation. She had traded a kingdom she never knew she had for a handful of glittering pebbles. "So, you see," Alex said, his voice retaining its impossible calm, "your proposal has a few issues. There is no marital home to divide. And as for alimony based on my income," he gestured to Marcus Thorne, the living proof of his statement, "I believe your estimate of $200,000 a year might need a slight upward revision." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world breaking. Isabella stared at Alex, not the man she had left, but a stranger she had lived with for 10 years and never once seen. The quiet, steady, boring man was gone. In his place sat one of the most powerful and wealthiest men in the country, a man worth not thousands, but hundreds of millions. Her mind reeled, frantically replaying the last decade. The missed cues, the signs she had dismissed as eccentricities. Alex's insistence on privacy. His lack of interest in climbing a corporate ladder she could see. His quiet confidence that she had mistaken for passivity. The times he had solved her family's financial problems. A failing business for her father, a bad investment for her brother, with a quiet phone call and a simple, "It's taken care of." She had thought he'd called in a favor with some mid-level bank manager. She now understood he had likely bought the bank. Her lawyer, Peterson, was the first to recover, though his professional veneer was shattered. He was visibly sweating. He had just presented a ridiculously insulting demand to a man who could buy and sell his entire law firm before lunch and not even notice the expense. I believe we have been operating under a significant misapprehension of the facts, he stammered, shuffling his papers as if they might offer an escape. Julian Croft was a statue of shock. His entire persona, his power, was built on being the biggest shark in the room. He had just discovered the room was, in fact, an ocean, and he was bait. He looked at Alex with a new, terrifying respect. This wasn't a rival he had beaten. This was a predator who had been patiently watching him, letting him play his little games, all along. But it was Isabella's reaction that held Alex's attention. Her face had crumbled. The confident, resolute mask was gone, replaced by a raw, gaping vulnerability. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of profound, life-altering regret. "Alex," she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't know." Alex met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw not the placid lake, but the deep, cold ocean beneath. There was no anger in his eyes, but there was no warmth either. There was only a great, sorrowful distance. "You didn't know the number, Isabella," he said, and his voice was soft, but every word was a judgment. "But you knew me. You knew my character. You knew I was steady. You knew I was loyal. You knew I was the man who held you when your mother was sick and who celebrated your smallest victories as if they were his own. You lived with that man for 10 years, and you decided his character wasn't enough. You decided he wasn't a real thing. The money is irrelevant. You didn't leave a poor man. You left the man you thought was poor. And that is what you have to live with." This was the moral mirror. He wasn't shaming her with his wealth. He was shaming her with her own values, reflected back at her in the harshest possible light. He then turned his attention to Julian. "And you, Mr. Croft, the real thing, a man who builds towers." Alex's tone shifted, losing its personal edge and taking on the chilling precision of a corporate executioner. "My firm, Titan Capital, has a significant interest in the stability of the commercial real estate market. We spend a great deal of time analyzing the portfolios of major developers. We like to know who is solid and who is over-leveraged." Julian's face went from pale to ashen. "Your flagship project, the Azure Tower," Alex continued, "is a magnificent building. It's also financed by a consortium of 3 different lenders, all of whom are growing increasingly nervous about your debt-to-equity ratio. Your entire empire is a house of cards, built on secondary loans and risky speculative bonds. You project an image of immense success, but the numbers tell a different story. The numbers I see." Marcus Thorne, who had been listening with a detached amusement, stepped forward slightly. "In fact," Marcus added, his voice casual, "Titan Capital's debt acquisition division was just presented with an interesting opportunity this morning to purchase the controlling interest in your primary lender's commercial debt portfolio. We were on the fence about it. It seemed a little risky." He looked at Alex. "But now, I'm beginning to think it might be a very strategic acquisition." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a declaration of war, delivered with a smile. They weren't just going to reject Isabella's demands. They were going to dismantle the man she had left him for. The poetic justice was breathtakingly cruel. Julian had built his identity on the illusion of financial power, and Alex was about to demonstrate what real financial power looked like by taking it all away. Julian finally broke. "You can't," he sputtered, a desperate plea. "That would ruin me." "Ruin you?" Alex asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not the one who took on $300 million in high-interest debt to build a monument to my own ego. I'm just a quiet number cruncher, remember? I just look at the math. And the math, Julian, is not in your favor." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Elias will be in touch with you, Mr. Peterson, to finalize the legal dissolution of the marriage. Isabella will be granted what she is entitled to under the law, 50% of the assets accumulated in our joint accounts since our marriage. It amounts to roughly $78,000, he paused. She will have 30 days to vacate this property. A professional moving service, at my expense, Can be arranged. He looked at the devastated group on the other side of the table. Richard and Eleanor looked like they had aged 20 years. Their dream of a powerful son-in-law had come true in the most nightmarish way possible. Julian was staring into the abyss of his own financial ruin. And Isabella was simply broken. "The meeting is over," Alex said. He turned and walked toward his office, Marcus following him, leaving Elias Vance to manage the stunned, silent wreckage in the living room. The door to his office clicked shut, another soft, final sound that marked the end of an entire world. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a slow, inexorable collapse. For Julian Croft, the ruin came swiftly. As Marcus had so casually suggested, Titan Capital acquired the debt portfolio of his primary lender. The next day, all of Julian's lines of credit were frozen pending a full financial review. His contractors walked off the job at the Azure Tower when their payments stopped. His investors, sensing blood in the water, began to pull out. The man who had been the toast of the city became a pariah overnight. The charismatic confidence was replaced by a desperate, haunted look. He stopped taking Isabella's calls. The last time she saw him, he was yelling at someone on his phone on a street corner, his expensive suit looking rumpled, his face a mask of panic. He had hitched his wagon to Isabella, believing she was his ticket to a higher social sphere, never imagining she was the anchor that would drag him down to the bottom of the ocean where her quiet ex-husband reigned. He had called Alex a nobody. He was now learning what it meant to be a nobody at the mercy of a somebody. For Isabella, the consequences were more personal and, in a way, more profound. The glittering world Julian had promised her dissolved like a mirage. She was forced to move out of his penthouse and into a small, sterile apartment she could barely afford with the money she had left. The friends who had flocked to her side when she was with Julian now barely returned her texts. Her status had been borrowed and the loan had been called in. She was haunted by Alex's words. "You knew my character, and you decided it wasn't enough." She played them over and over in her mind, each repetition a fresh wave of self-recrimination. She had been so blind, so dazzled by the superficial trappings of success that she had completely missed the real thing right in front of her. The quiet, steady rock she had once cherished had been the peak of a mountain of gold, and she had traded it for a painted stone. Her parents were no comfort. They were trapped in their own social nightmare. The story of Alex Vance, the secret billionaire, had begun to leak out into their social circles, passed in hushed whispers at the country club and charity events. Richard and Eleanor were no longer the proud parents of the woman who had landed Julian Croft. They were the foolish in-laws who had insulted and disrespected one of the wealthiest men in the state. They were figures of ridicule. Their friends looked at them with a mixture of pity and contempt. They had worshipped at the altar of status and wealth, and had been struck down by the very God they prayed to. Isabella tried to reach Alex. She left desperate, pleading voicemails. "Alex, please, we need to talk. I made a terrible mistake. I was a fool. I see that now. Please, just let me explain." He never answered. He had his assistant block her number. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. The trust was not just broken. It had been pulverized. There was nothing left to rebuild. About a month after the meeting, Alex was in his new home. He had sold the suburban house, or rather, the trust had, and purchased a stunning penthouse apartment in the city. It wasn't the gaudy, ostentatious kind of place Julian would have owned. It was a masterpiece of minimalist design, with clean lines, warm woods, and vast windows that offered a panoramic, godlike view of the city. It was a space that reflected his true nature. Quiet, powerful, and with a perspective few others could ever see. Elias Vance came to visit, bringing the final divorce decree for his signature. "It's done," Elias said, handing him a pen. She didn't contest anything. Her lawyer advised her to take what was offered and disappear as quietly as possible. "Julian Croft has declared bankruptcy. The Azure Tower is now the property of the bank, which is, for all intents and purposes, us. We'll complete it and sell it at a tidy profit." Alex signed the document, his signature a simple, clean stroke. He felt no triumph, only a quiet, somber sense of closure. "And Isabella?" he asked. Elias sighed. "From what I hear, she's struggling, working a retail job at a high-end boutique, the same one her mother used to shop at." The irony is not lost on anyone. Alex looked out the window at the sprawling city below. He could see the skeletal frame of the unfinished Azure Tower in the distance, a monument to another man's failed ambition. "I want you to do something for me, Elias," Alex said, turning from the window. "Anonymously, I want you to set up a fund for her. Not a fortune, but enough so that she won't be destitute. Enough for her to get an education if she wants one, or to start a small business. A real one, on her own terms." Elias looked at his friend and client, his expression one of deep respect. After everything she did? After the humiliation, the greed? "It's not for her," Alex said softly. "It's for me. My success means nothing if it makes me cruel. She made a mistake, a catastrophic one, but I don't want her life to be ruined. I want her to have a chance to build something for herself. Something real. Not based on a man or his money, but on her own merit." Elias nodded slowly. "This is why you are who you are, Alex. And why they are who they are." He picked up the signed decree. "I'll see to it. It will be completely untraceable." Alex was left alone in the vast, quiet apartment. The chapter was finally truly closed. He had not sought revenge, but justice. And in the end, he had chosen mercy. He was free. He could now begin to build a life where the man he was and the wealth he had were no longer separate things, but an integrated whole, guided by the quiet integrity that had been his true fortune all along. 6 months passed. The city continued its relentless rhythm, but for the players in this drama, the world had been irrevocably altered. Alex Vance was a changed man, not in his core character, but in his engagement with the world. He had stepped out from behind the curtain. While Marcus Thorne remained the primary public face of Titan Capital, Alex began to take a more visible role in the firm's philanthropic endeavors. He endowed a chair at his old university and established a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships for gifted students from low-income backgrounds. He was occasionally photographed at charity events, always looking slightly uncomfortable in the spotlight, but his quiet presence began to command a different kind of respect. He was no longer a ghost. He was the discreet, powerful force for good that people were beginning to recognize. His new life was not about flaunting his wealth, but about deploying it with purpose. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost a year to the day since Isabella had left, he was sitting at an outdoor cafe, reading. A woman approached his table, hesitant. It was Isabella. He wouldn't have recognized her at first. The sharp, designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair was styled more naturally, and she wore little makeup. The desperate, hunted look she'd had in the months after the collapse was gone. In its place was a quiet humility, and a weariness that seemed to have settled deep in her bones. But there was a clarity in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. "Alex?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up, surprised. He hadn't seen or spoken to her since that day in the house. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Isabella, please." She sat, her hands nervously twisting a napkin. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she began. I saw you sitting here, and I had to say something." "It's all right," he said, his tone gentle. "I wanted to thank you," she said, looking him in the eye, "for the fund. I know it was you. My lawyer told me an anonymous benefactor had set up an educational trust for me. There's only one person in the world who would do that." Alex didn't confirm or deny it. He just listened. "I'm going back to school," she continued, a faint pride in her voice. "I'm getting a degree in social work. I spent so many years wanting to be around powerful people. Now I think I want to help people who have no power at all." She gave a small, sad smile. "It turns out the job at the boutique was illuminating. I saw my mother and her friends from the other side of the counter. The way they looked at me, the way they looked right through me. I realized that's how I must have looked at people. At you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Alex. What I did was unforgivable. And I'm not here to ask for another chance. I destroyed that. I just wanted you to know that the lesson. It landed. I was so busy looking for a man who was more. I never bothered to become more myself. I'm trying to do that now. And I'm doing it on my own. She stood up. That's all. I just needed to say it. I hope you're happy, Alex. You deserve to be. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Alex watched her go. He felt a sense of profound and final peace. His act of mercy had not been in vain. It had given her a chance not to reclaim her old life, but to build a new one, a better one, on a foundation of humility and self-awareness. Her redemption was not his to grant, but he had given her the tools to find it herself. He looked down at his book, but he didn't see the words. He saw the arc of the past year, the pain, the revelation, the quiet aftermath. He had lost a wife, but he had found himself. He had been forced to confront the wall he had built between his two lives, and in tearing it down, he had become whole. True worth, he reflected, was not a number in a bank account that could be hidden or revealed. It wasn't in the towers men built to touch the sky or the applause of a crowd. It was in the quiet integrity of a person's character. It was in the strength to be dignified in the face of humiliation, the wisdom to be just in the exercise of power, and the grace to be merciful when vengeance was an easy option. Isabella had been searching for a real thing, and in the end, through a painful and destructive journey, she was finally on the path to becoming one herself. And Alex, the quiet man in the quiet house, had proven he had been one all along. What do you think is the most important quality in a life partner? Is it ambition, kindness, stability, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. We learn so much from hearing your perspectives. If this story of quiet strength and deserved vindication resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to our channel for more content that explores the complexities of human relationships and the true meaning of worth. We have many more stories to share with this wonderful community you've all helped us build. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.